Hey there, I'm Andrew Chang. Welcome to About That. Now, if you've been here before, you know our show is all about explaining and expanding on the news and, like tapping into what people are already talking about. But today we thought we would do something a little different. I want to delve into a topic that maybe we haven't been talking about enough: the forgotten humanitarian crises of the world. Places that, before the pandemic weren't doing all that great. And then our attention shifted and those places only got worse. Like Yemen, where before 2020, the UN had deemed as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. At the time, some 80% of the population, 24.1 million people, needed humanitarian assistance, with half on the brink of starvation in the midst of a relentless civil war. Then the pandemic hit, and the United Nations started running out of cash. Donations dried up. Too many countries too busy fighting COVID back home. Or how about Uganda, home of the largest refugee population in Africa, 1.5 million people from abroad. That was already putting an unbelievable strain on the country. But again, the pandemic made things worse, and importantly, made the living conditions of those refugees worse. Or think of Afghanistan, where last month, the Taliban not only banned women from attending universities, they can't even work at NGOs, those very organizations that try to make countries like Afghanistan better places to live. I mean, women can't even be part of the solution there. Now, I want to invite someone who's been to all of these places because, Sam, you more than most know what's at stake for 2023 and what sort of the reality is on the ground. How are you doing, first of all?
I'm okay. I'm okay. It's been a lot of travel lately, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah, and I know you have other trips coming up. Sam Nutt is, you're a doctor at Women's College Hospital here in Toronto. You're also the president and founder of War Child Canada. And I mean, how long have you been working in war zones across the world?
Oh, now you're going to date me. I've been working in war zones for over 25 years. I started in Somalia with UNICEF during the famine.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do, folks, while we have Sam here in studio. You've heard of these like scratch maps, like they're sort of like scratch lottery tickets, but, where you scratch off the country that you've traveled to. So we have a producer here who's going to be scratching all of the countries on a map that we talk about, where there are serious humanitarian concerns on the ground. At the end of the program, Sam is going to try to connect all of those dots for us.
Okay.
But right now we have lots to talk about.
Yemen is at risk of the worst famine the world has seen in decades.
Millions are starving, not only without food to eat, but little in the way of medical care for those most in need.
Here's northern Tigray region. 9 months of war between the Ethiopian federal government and leaders in Tigray has spread into the neighboring regions of Afar and Amhara, creating a severe humanitarian crisis. The United Nations warns that what's effectively a blockade on aid convoys by rival forces is pushing millions of people to the brink of famine.
The situation is dire, and authorities are struggling to get to the grips with the scale of it all.
In terms of acute malnutrition, in this year we have experienced the worst that we have had in the last 10 years.
So, Sam, where is the need most acute right now? And what is the common thread that connects these countries where people are starving?
It is. We're facing the worst food security crisis, certainly in the last 2 decades, probably in the last 3 decades. I mean, it's hard for me to even believe that, as I mentioned, I started in Somalia during the famine in the early 90s, and the images and scenes that I'm seeing play out in different corners of the world right now are certainly on par with what I experienced when I started doing this kind of work. And it's it's astonishing and horrific at the same time. So we are facing the worst food security crisis. We have 50 million people throughout the world right now primarily, to answer your question, in the Horn of Africa, but beyond that as well, including in Yemen and in Afghanistan. Tremendous vulnerability, and what's driving that is several things. I mean, one is certainly climate change, but increasing conflict. The war in Ukraine, which is, as we keep calling it, the world's breadbasket, that is true.
Ukraine, of course, is known as the breadbasket of Europe. Along with Russia, it is one of the world's largest cereal producers, but now the war is causing major disruptions.
But the war has made it tricky to not only grow, but get that and other grains out. Devastating for countries that rely on it.
Here are the country's major agricultural regions, many of which are currently affected by the ongoing fighting.
Plenty of those rockets and cluster bombs are hitting Ukraine's wheat fields, setting fire to thousands of acres. It's another challenge for the farmers and for a world that is increasingly desperate for Ukraine's crops.
That has dramatically influenced food prices, increased food prices throughout the world, which means that people who live with poverty are finding it harder to afford food, to access food. And then on top of that, you have conflict and displacement. So in a lot of different countries, certainly where War Child is operating, we have seen a declining security situation, an increase in hostilities, which makes it that much harder for people to farm and for people to access food, and children starve.
What is something that you've seen in your travels that's sort of really like if the rest of us just saw that the way that you saw it, we would understand?
I mean, look, I have seen women standing in line at feeding clinics holding infants who have already succumbed to malnutrition and dehydration, hoping that something can still be done for their children. I mean, these are the kinds of scenes that, unfortunately, when you do the kind of work I do, play out over and over and over again. And people are increasingly desperate, which means they're also driven to make increasingly desperate choices. So, for example, in families in Yemen and in other parts of the world, if you have several children and you know all of them will starve, what sometimes happens is that you will end up taking very difficult decisions to either marry off one of your young girls at a very early age, because then you can actually get a dowry. That's one less mouth to feed. And you're seeing increases in early and child marriage in a lot of the different places in which we're operating, where girls is 10, 11, 12 years of age are being married off.
The Taliban government of Afghanistan has ordered an indefinite ban on university education for women.
The latest blow to Afghan women who've seen hard-won, fragile progress rolled back, step by step, since the group seized power last year.
Now what are we supposed to do? She asks on social media. Kill ourselves? What more is there left to take away from us? Yells this woman at the closed gates. Indeed, since last year, when American troops withdrew from Afghanistan and the Taliban imposed its harsh Islamic rule, women have lost almost all freedom.
So, Sam, in Afghanistan, I mean, the return to power of the Taliban, that seemed to just put a complete, freeze on progress there.
We've been on the ground in Afghanistan for more than 20 years. I've been to that country many, many times. Had seen terrific progress, particularly because we are focused on women's education and women and girls' education and women's economic development and empowerment, and women who were, girls who were in school, who were graduating, women who are running businesses. It has all stopped.
We have some big aid groups now stopping operations in Afghanistan now that the Taliban is preventing women from working with NGOs.
This time, they're being told to stay away from work that's crucial to getting humanitarian aid to millions of people.
The UN has warned against limiting women's role in the humanitarian sector.
Effective humanitarian assistance relies on the meaningful participation of women, as they stated, and we cannot overstate the importance of their capacities, insight, and ability to reach women and girls across the country.
I mean, almost 30% of our staff in Afghanistan are women. And we're in a very difficult situation now as well, where we're, like every other member of the international community, trying to figure out how we move forward. You have an acute humanitarian crisis, and the most vulnerable are women and children. but you can't hire women.
Right.
And so do you stop programming? Do you continue to program under those conditions?
So that decree, I mean, from the Taliban government really has thrown a wrench in efforts of organizations such as yours.
Everybody. It's every single international organization out there, whether they are UN or humanitarian organizations or others. We are all wrestling right now with what is the best approach here, and obviously trying to engage with the authorities to reverse this decision, but recognizing that there's very little power that we have except to say that we'll have to suspend our operations. But when you say you're going to suspend your operations on principle, and I mean, we're a female-led organization, War Child Canada, right? We're hoping that the negotiations that are taking place right now with most organizations at least pressing pause on their operations to try to encourage the Taliban, the more hardline elements to come back to the table, we're hoping that that will be effective. Look, nobody's under any illusions here. Working under a Taliban regime is very, very complicated. It is unpredictable. It is at times, frankly, infuriating. But the reality is that if you don't find a path forward, people die. And so maintaining some kind of conversation, some kind of dialogue in a very constructive way, that is the only approach that we have. Because doing nothing, the consequences of doing nothing is just, to me anyway, unconscionable.
You know, we did a whole show recently on the protests in Iran. And it sort of makes me wonder, like what is the wider picture here? When, we're talking specifically about women's rights, not just in Afghanistan and in Iran, but around the world. What's the bigger picture here and how it all connects together?
I think in the last couple of years, women's rights have taken a beating, frankly. I mean, even if you look at the United States and overturning of Roe versus Wade.
My body, my choice.
Fury outside the Supreme Court
My choice.
as American women lose the constitutional protection to get an abortion.
This will have immediate effects here. By all estimates, about half of the states are expected to eliminate the right to abortion. We've got about a half dozen states that have so-called trigger laws that their abortion bans will go into effect either immediately or within the next 30 days or the next few months.
Forcing women, those who can afford it, to travel to democratic states like New York or California, where the procedure will still be legal. For now.
If you look at, for example, Yemen, where there has been, again, a massive restriction on the rights of women and girls, the imposition of mahram, which means they can't even travel to work without a male family member, which means it makes it very difficult for them to have jobs and to go to school and all of those kinds of things. Afghanistan with the Taliban. We are seeing, this is a very difficult time. And like I said, the unique situations that women and girls face throughout the world because of poverty, because of war, because of displacement, their needs are not being met to the extent that they need to be. And that's part of a bigger issue as well, in the sense that as all of these humanitarian needs are growing, we have spent a lot of time focused, understandably, on the crisis in Ukraine, but we have often forgotten about some of these other very acute, very important humanitarian disasters that are taking place throughout the world. And the level of funding, the level of engagement, the level of conversation and support, unfortunately, just isn't there.
Okay. We do have to take a moment, just a pause for a commercial break. We will be back on the other side, though. Lots more to talk about with Sam Nutt. Hey there, welcome back to About That. We are here with Sam Nutt, who's a doctor at Women's College Hospital in Toronto, also president and founder of War Child Canada. And we are talking about those parts of the world facing intense, severe humanitarian crises, which maybe we should be paying a little more attention to.
Last week, the WFP called on all parties to allow the movement of aid into the region, where 90% of the population are in urgent need of help. It estimates 100 trucks of aid need to enter Tigray each day to feed them.
The locals say they have nothing to plant now. And it's not just the drought, pests, and insecurity that are causing hunger, but also the cost of food. The rapidly rising prices of commodities is increasing the numbers of hungry in this corner of Uganda. Help, say experts, is needed now.
In Yemen, 25% of people with confirmed COVID-19 die, 5 times the global average.
It feels like the end. It feels like a calamity. They think the world has forgotten them.
Tell me, Sam, what are those parts of the world that have reached a crisis point and that most of us may not even realize have done so, and that situation just threatens to boil over?
Well, there are quite a few. Certainly Somalia, Ethiopia with the Tigrayan crisis, South Sudan, Eastern Congo has witnessed a significant escalation in hostilities over the past year. Yemen, Afghanistan, I mean, these would be the ones that I would consider to be very high priority. But then you also have ongoing difficulties as a result of, and vulnerabilities as a result of displacement too. So you've got large refugee populations in Uganda who are increasingly vulnerable, large refugee populations in the sort of broader Syrian region as well. So, you know, these are some of the big concerns. And you know, to the point, I was listening to the setup deck there, and the gentleman from the UN turned around, he said, you know, the people feel as if they've been forgotten. And that's certainly something I've spent the last 4 months going to various parts of the world, and that is the message that I'm hearing more often than anything else, is that why has the world forgotten us? Why do they not see our suffering? Why is it not enough? You know, why is there so much disparity in who we care about and how we care?
And what do you tell those people when they ask that question?
You know, it's the hardest question to answer of all. You turn around and you say, well, this is why we're here. This is why we're trying. This is why we hope to draw attention to this particular crisis. Because hopefully by generating that level of awareness, we will increase the level of support and be able to do more and to help. But it's tough.
The pandemic must have done, though, a real number on the extent to which the international community is willing and able to devote time, energy, and money to those parts of the world that so desperately need it, right? All these countries sort of looking more inwardly.
Looking more inwardly and also looking for ways to manage expenses and cut budgets. Obviously, we paid our way out of the pandemic, incurred a significant amount of debt, many Western countries in particular. And so we are seeing cutbacks to foreign aid from a lot of the major contributors, historically major contributors. So for example, the UK has cut their foreign aid budgets. Other European countries have also cut their foreign aid budgets. I mean, it's disastrous. People become more and more vulnerable. And then, I mean, it's like that whole public health adage, right? Where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's what you see. So when UN agencies, refugee agencies in particular, don't have the funding that they need to be able to provide food or food vouchers to refugees, they become more likely to experience malnutrition. When they're malnourished, they're more likely to experience negative health outcomes. Their children are more likely to die. I mean, it all just snowballs to the point where it becomes unmanageable.
About 400,000 Ukrainians have fled in just 4 days. The exodus is accelerating. Family reunions, separations, and haunting memories. Katerina and Darina left after a bomb hit an airport near their home. We don't know when we'll go back. A lot of people were killed in the east and south. It's very scary.
A number of Ukrainians have been killed or injured in the latest strikes by Russia, but indeed, the drone attacks have caused power outages, leaving countless more without heat as winter's cold continues.
Not only is Ukraine a disaster area in itself, but as it grows about 10%, maybe a bit more of the world's wheat, corn, and various other foods, this has huge knock-on effects for places in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East.
So, which is an excellent point, right? And we've touched on Ukraine a couple of times now, and so for that country in particular, I still remember the first time when I heard that cluster munitions were being used, right? In Kherson, for example, these inherently indiscriminate attacks, and civilians were killed, children were killed. But the world sort of stepped up with Ukraine, right? And responded in a pretty big way.
They have, yeah. I mean, I think that there has been, understandably, an outpouring of support coming out of this, as a result of this crisis. My regret around that is that, I really feel very strongly that it should be a yes and, that if we can do it in that context, we need to consider how we can up our game in other contexts as well. So you mentioned the cluster munitions, for example. Yemen is one of the most heavily mined countries in the world, and there are children who are losing their limbs in fields, farming fields, because of landmines and cluster bombs, and that's also aggravating the food security problem, because they have land that they can no longer use because it needs to be demined, but there's very little money or resources available to do that.
And how much, can we quantify how much the money has decreased that has been sent to countries like Yemen or to other countries, because so much of the world's attention has been diverted to Ukraine? Do we have any sense of that?
Well, what we have a sense of is what percentage, when you issue a humanitarian appeal, what percentage is funded. So, for example, in March of this year, the numbers have since changed, but in March of this year, Ukraine was in March of 2022, I should say, Ukraine was 115% funded. Okay. In September of 2022, Congo was at 9% funded, despite the fact that they have 95 million people living in Congo. They have, 5 million people have lost their lives in that war. They have tens of thousands who have become refugees who are fleeing to other parts of the world. Same with Yemen, less than 40% funded. Afghanistan is around 20% funded. So, when we talk about how we support and who we're supporting, we also need to be looking at where are the areas at greatest risk.
But I'm also thinking of your earlier point about how there are some in the world who view some of these conflicts as being intractable, as being unsolvable and barely manageable. And I wonder if are people more keen to send money and aid and devote their time and energy to Ukraine because they think success is achievable there?
I think it also has to do with when a crisis is new. People pay attention to it. They're shocked. They want to do something. There's this urgency, and then over time we become more cynical and more immune to those images, and that's very hard to combat, that kind of apathy.
And Ukraine may be a long-standing conflict too.
It will be a long-standing conflict. It will be, which has also not just implications for civilians living within Ukraine, but massive implications for the rest of the world as well from a peace and security perspective.
We have to take one more commercial break, but we'll be back with a final thought from you, Sam, and a look at the scratch map.
Okay.
Back in a moment. Hey, welcome back. So, Sam, this is it, the scratch map, and all kinds of parts of the world: Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East, Africa. But you connect the dots for me. What do you see?
Well, I think the most important dots to connect, Andrew, are down here. I mean, this is where people are experiencing in the global south the greatest amount of suffering and vulnerability. There is an opportunity for us to engage in meaningful humanitarian responses, and it is within the power of other countries, including our own, to do something, and we can, and it's not too late.
And these conflicts and crises, won't stay contained to these areas if left unchecked.
And they don't. We've seen that in the 100 million people who are displaced throughout the world, that violence anywhere has a habit of spilling over borders, bringing in its neighbors, and creating a threat to peace and security everywhere.
Thank you, Sam, for this conversation.
Thank you.
And hey, thank you so much for watching. We hope you'll tune in tomorrow for another edition of About That. Thanks so much. Cheers.